Hello and welcome to Rippercast, your podcast on Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. This is episode 14, The Song and Dance Man, Frogg Moody, originally released on May 18th, 2008. And our special guest is Frogg Moody, and he is a composer, author, and editor of the Whitechapel Society Journal, which is the publishing wing of the Whitechapel Society 1888. That organization arose from the Cloak and Dagger Club, largely due to the efforts of Frogg Moody. He is also the composer of the musical Yours Truly, Jack the Ripper, and also he has done work on a play on a Titanic. And we do thank Frogg for coming on the show today. Hi, Frogg.
Hi, thanks for having me. Just a correction, I'm not actually editor of the Whitechapel Society Journal. That's Adrian Morris. I'm the production, really. I put the thing together.
Oh, okay. The production designer, then.
Yeah.
All right, Frogg, you've been around since you're an old frequenter of the Cloak and Dagger Club. Why don't you tell our listeners what first got you interested in the Whitechapel murders?
I think it was a program that was on BBC television based around fictional detectives Watt and Barlow. It was probably one of the first programs to serialise the Jack the Ripper murders, as far as I can remember. I was only a child at the time, but I can remember sneaking down the stairs, listening to that lovely music that introduced the program, and watching the program through the crack of the jar of the door, because I wasn't allowed to watch such horrible things. All the adults were allowed to watch it. Of course, I used to sneak down. As soon as a young boy is told you can't watch something, they probably go and do so. So I used to watch the whole program through the crack of the door. Mm-hmm. After that, I remember seeing an old silent movie called The Lodger, Hitchcock, one of Hitchcock's first films. That got me really interested in the world of film. And I think the first book on the Ripper subject was bought to me for a present. It was the Stephen Knight book. With that in hand, I then decided to go and visit all the murder locations up in the East End. That was in the early 80s, and ended up having a few jars in the 10 Bells pub. So my first visit to the East End was the early 1980s.
Okay.
Frogg, you're best known, in the Ripper community for your musical, Yours Truly, Jack the Ripper. How did that project come about, and when did it start?
Well, I've been in lots of rock bands and travelled through Europe, made records, all the usual things that you do. I became quite disillusioned with rock bands because people never used to turn up for rehearsals, and things used to come to a dead end. We had contracts that went pear-shaped. So I decided one day to lock myself away into a recording studio and do like a concept album based around my favourite subject, which was the Jack the Ripper murders. I was probably locked away for 3 months in the studio, called in session musicians, that sort of thing, to help me. When the album was finished, we decided that perhaps we should try and see if we could make it into a rock musical, which we promptly did. We turned around and got actors and actresses and the producer, not really knowing how it was going to go down, because I had this fear of, the feminist element turned up and saying, how dare you portray, glorify the Jack the Ripper murders in stage plays and that sort of thing. However, we did, and it went down really well. Through that, we played the first ever British-UK conference. We were the entertainment for the Saturday night when Rosie Howells organised it. And then we did the show at the first American conference as well. So it stemmed from that, really. We've played all over the UK, really, Norwich, London, all around, South Coast. And last year it was actually taken up by an American company who produced it. They actually paid us royalties to perform it in the States. So that was terrific.
Frogg, it's Mike in Hull. I know the musical is available on CD. Are there any plans to release it as sort of on any of the visual formats, such as DVD or Blu-ray or anything like that?
Well, interestingly enough, I was approached by a filmmaker, and we did actually make the show into a feature-length film. It was he wrote a new story around it, based around an intrigue, based around a touring musical company. Wrote a new story, but it was all the songs were involved in it, and part of our script was involved in it. Unfortunately, due to contractual problems, it's never been released. It was supposed to go to Cannes, the New York Film Festival. It still might do so, because we're still in negotiations trying to get this contractual problem sorted out. The film's completed. It was actually shown at the conference in Brighton in a rough format, but we're hoping, the idea is to actually release it eventually on DVD, yeah.
We're lucky enough to have on the show two veterans from the old Cloak and Dagger days, being yourself and Paul Begg. Could you give us a little bit of background on how that club was formed, and kind of, I know it's probably a long story, but kind of take us through the Cloak and Dagger Club and then how that spawned Ripperologist Magazine?
Well, it was actually started by a fellow called Mark Galloway in 1994. He met with a group of chums to set this club up to study the Jack the Ripper murders, and to some extent the East End as well. They originally met in a pub in the East End called the Alma, eventually moved to another pub called the City Darts. Mark Galloway was the first editor of the in-house journal that was called the Ripperologist. That was forwarded somewhat by a chap called Paul Daniels. Eventually, Paul Begg took over as editor, and the magazine improved with fantastic covers and a much better content. Eventually, through one thing and another, the journal, Ripperologist, and the Cloak and Dagger Club went their separate ways. Now, in 2005, I decided to start the thing off again, really, as the Whitechapel Society, trying to bring in more elements of the East End. I think that there's only so much you can talk about on the Jack the Ripper subject, so I wanted to bring more speakers in, a wider spectrum of East End interests, and it's kind of picked up from there, really. That's it pretty much up to date.
And there's some talk that maybe the name of the club, Cloak and Dagger, was an impediment to getting a wider audience to participate.
Well, the thing I found was I took over booking the speakers, and it seemed like when I phoned up academics, professors and stuff, who I wanted to attract to the club, doctors, so forth, the name, the Cloak and Dagger Club, kind of put them off. They thought it was a role-played Jack the Ripper society. Even when I explained to them that that wasn't the case at all, the name was still enough to put some people off. So we thought that the Whitechapel Society might appeal to a wider audience of speakers.
Frogg, have you got any plans to put the talks onto tape or disc or something or other, so that people who, for one reason or another, don't attend the club or can't attend the club because they live too far away, they would be able to hear what's said? Because you're really pulling in some good speakers now. You have forgotten the lady's name, but who's doing the book? I think it's the Dorset Street book, isn't it? She's due to speak soon.
Is that Sarah Wise?
I think that's that. Yeah, Sarah Wise's book, and isn't she due to speak there? Because I'd love to hear some of the talks, but you can't always get to the club to do that.
Well, she is the next speaker. That's one I'm really looking forward to this year.
Yeah, me too. If I could get.
There's all sorts of ideas floating around, and I've actually I've been trying to come off the committee myself. I'm trying to go ex officio to try and make some of the more committee members a bit more proactive.
Right.
But we've been toying around with ideas like having iPod broadcasts, videoing them and putting them out for sale, recording the talks, that sort of thing. That's all been chewed around, talked over, but really there's only so much I can do myself. It really needs someone else. So, when you're doing the magazine, the website, and booking the speakers. It really needs someone else to come forward and take it forward.
It's always been a bit of a problem, but certainly one of those things that it would stop it being kind of a horrible phrase, but parochial. It would broaden the horizons of the club a lot if some of these talks could be recorded and even just put onto a CD from the computer and provided. I'd certainly love to get those.
I think the thing that happens, this happens generally, but when the Whitechapel Society started in 2005, it starts with bright ideas and everybody's all for it, and and to a certain extent, a lot of those ideas have, they've worked and it's gone from strength to strength. But really, it needs a bit more. I mean, there's a hell of a lot more work to do to make it the society I want it to become. It's not there yet. For instance, I mean, I'd like Whitechapel societies worldwide, different groups meeting worldwide to, with a nerve centre based in London, which would be us. But the ideas come across as fantastical, but that's what I want to achieve eventually.
So do you encourage people in the United States and Canada or whatever to start up their own Whitechapel societies, or I mean, how do you envision that working?
Basically, yeah. It's like other societies, like the Sherlock Holmes societies. They're worldwide. They've got a nerve centre that's based in the UK. But yeah, eventually groups of people all over Europe, worldwide, meeting to discuss and study the Jack the Ripper in the East End. The social history, Victoriana, etc. But it would be under the hat of the Whitechapel Society based in the UK, London.
I think that's
one of the ways that might be encouraged is if you could get to do the talks and everything else on a disc, because I don't know that groups of people meeting in cities across America, because you'd have to presumably it would have to be city based, wouldn't it? Because at a push, people can come from all over Britain to London for a meeting, but it's a bit difficult to go from all over America to Los Angeles or somewhere for the weekly meeting.
Well, I know this probably isn't a very good example, but I belong to the Laurel and Hardy Society, and they've got what they call tents, which are different organisations, and it is worldwide. There's one in Rochester in the UK, and there's one in Bath, Somerset and Bath, and it works really well. I think really it would have to be organised. There would have to be a set of guidelines drawn up, almost like a constitution drawn up, that would be the same virtually everywhere to make it work.
Yeah. Certainly, organisations like that exist in the sphere of science fiction, where they end up and they have the World Science Fiction Convention and held somewhere every year, but they're all different groups meet to discuss things in different cities around the world. So,
yeah, I mean we've actually had people from our own society saying, there's not much more you can sort of like talk about. That's a ridiculous statement. When you take the sphere of what was happening in the East End at the time, social history was invented in the East End.
It's an endless conversation. I mean, just yesterday we have one title, Who Was Jack the Ripper, and we have 3 speakers, and I think it started at 2:00 and it didn't finish at 5:30, and all 3 speakers talked about something different. So yeah. even under one subject heading, and they were all broad generalization things. There was nobody talking about specific suspects there. So it's an endless subject area for discussion.
I mean, there is still, unfortunately, a little bit of animosity within the world of Ripperology. Certain things caused by the diary. I mean, even the split between the Ripperologist and and the Cloak and Dagger Club is still a thing of contention. It still brings forward a certain amount of. It's still a certain element of nastiness going around in the world of Ripperology, and it's absolutely ludicrous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I don't understand it. I don't understand why people bear grudges, and they've got to continue this ridiculous, stupid idea of I'm not speaking to him, or different camps of people.
Yes, although there are certain benefits sometimes about not speaking to him.
Very true.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Yeah.
Well, I'm joking. but no, I mean, yes, I mean it is it unfortunately the subject has become a bit riddled with that. Don Rumbelow, I was talking to the other night at the exhibition, and he was saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
I have a question for Frogg. Jack the Ripper is one of those subjects that tend to lend itself to people creating stories around it. It really seems to spark the creative need in certain people. There's more movies, plays, musicals about that person, whoever he was, than, say, the Zodiac Killer or any like people. I was just wondering, two-part question. Why do you think that is? And two, what is your favorite fictional treatment or creative treatment of the Jack the Ripper story besides your own?
Well, I think really it's because it's the ultimate whodunit. You've answered the question really, because no one knows who it was, and it's the ultimate whodunit. I love The Lodger. The Lodger, to me, talking of musicals, I'd love to put The Lodger film, Hitchcock's film, to music myself. I've actually started working on that, but with all these other things going on, I'm a bit too busy to go back to the studio for 3 months, as I did for the Jack the Ripper show. But yeah, I mean, I don't think the subject of Jack the Ripper will ever go away. It is the ultimate whodunit. There's always new suspects coming up. Even you would think that the subject's been done to death, but it hasn't. There's always new takes on it. There's always new suspects coming out. And as I say, the industry that's been built around it is absolutely unbelievable. Books, plays, films, radio shows. It's absolutely incredible.
Frogg, most of us discuss the Ripper case sort of long distance. We do it through the message boards at Casebook and other sites. And I was wondering what it was like, or what it is like, to discuss it in the forums you guys do, because you guys have started at the Alma and went on to the City Darts. As you said, it seems much more personal in the way to socially socialization, to get together and discuss subject with like-minded individuals. So I suppose the question is what's a typical meeting like for those who who don't get to go to one?
A classic example of how to answer that question was when Trevor Marriott's book came out, and it was done to death by a lot of people. He was ridiculed, and he had a chance to answer just a few people face to face. He gave an absolutely fantastic account of himself. He welcomed, because I believe he goes out for quite a large fee talking on a subject of Jack the Ripper. Well, he came to us for nothing, because he wanted to face the people that had criticised him to answer some of those questions. So he was able to do that, and we made sure that everybody that was there that night, and it was a really good turnout, didn't pull any punches. We wanted them to ask the questions of him, that they criticised in his book, and he really was on top form that night. So it's an opportunity, rather than people to do it, behind a shroud, the internet, let's say, to do it face to face.
Yeah, because I've heard a few interesting talks actually on tape that I've managed to get a hold of through friends of the Whitechapel Society, and I remember hearing Paul Feldman speak and other controversial figures, and the tough questions seemed to be there, but there still seemed to be that respect shown. There didn't seem to be a lot of just explosion of nastiness. It seemed like people were able to discuss things and get their points across without it turning into a mudslinging match.
I think it's a very different thing, isn't it?
Sorry, Paul.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's a very different thing for when you're facing somebody than it is when you're hiding behind a keyboard. Kind of have to be nice in case they hit you.
I actually, if I could step in, again, I agree with you, Paul. I think Howard always asks me, what do you think about, the message boards? And I say they're good and bad, and a lot of people don't understand what that means. They're good for providing information, but they're bad. They're bad because they have that anonymity. And I respect authors or researchers who go out and speak, and you'll find that there is a more calm tone when you're in a room with somebody, and you can still ask the tough questions, but you're getting answers versus just being attacked, and it's more welcome. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I like the podcast as well, because I think just hearing somebody's voice, just hearing the way they express themselves, you even pick up elements of sincerity and everything else from the voice, and I think that's an excellent thing as well, because it suddenly makes people human. They're not just words on a message board, and that's very good.
One of the interesting things for me is, reading the history of the Ripper murders was the fact that on the night of the murder of Stride, there was a debating society happening in the East End, and I love the idea of that still happening. With the Whitechapel Society, it's an organisation that meet to debate, the very subject that was happening on the night of the Stride murder. I quite like that. I like the fact that in this day and age of people watching television and not getting out so much, that there are still debating societies that people can go to.
Frogg, it's Mike in Hull. For the benefit of the listeners, how can people subscribe to the Whitechapel Society?
The best way is through our website, www.whitechapelsociety.com. You can subscribe through that.
Frogg, I have a question. Stan in New York, how you doing?
How you doing, Stan?
Good. This is actually a question on something you touched on with calling it the Cloak and Dagger Club and finding that you had difficulty in getting academics to come and speak. What do you think is the negative impact of having stuff about the Ripper fall into that entertainment genre?
Well, all I can say is that a lot of people that I approached, and we're not talking about one or two here, we're talking about quite a few, and I actually wondered if the reason that the old Cloak and Dagger Club was having difficulty getting speakers was the fact that they thought it was a society or a club of weirdos that reenact the murders out. They all met to actually do role play in cloaks and top hats and that sort of thing. And even when you were sort of like talking to these people, you say, "Well, I can assure you that's not the case." It was enough. The name was enough to put them off. You get the image of Jack the Ripper of the top hat and the knife and the cloak and all the rest of it, and there's no actually getting out of some people's minds.
Right, and this is around the same time that parties, like dinner parties, I know this was a fad in the United States in the mid-'90s where murder mystery dinner parties would take place where people would all pay a fee to go and have dinner, and then a murder mystery would be enacted in front of them, and they'd all have fun playing Clue and trying to solve the mystery, that type of thing. So,
well, I think those can actually be great fun. Those can be great fun because you know exactly what you're going to. But we wanted people to know that we were a serious debating society, and we're trying to advance the study of Ripperology, and social history of the East End. That's how we want to come across. We don't want to come across or even be thought of as some weird role play society.
If I can just have a follow up to that.
Sure.
I think that's great, and I agree. The first Ripper conference I went to, people thought I was dressing up because they didn't understand that it was an academic. There were lectures and other stuff about the case that was all based in academics. But I guess the question that I'm really concerned on is, do you feel that the field of Ripperology has not so much been invaded, but has been immersed with people who look for that other than academic sides of the issue because it has become such a mainstream issue, that entertainment side of it?
I think there's some justification in that statement. Yeah, I do. One of the elements of when we first did the show, yours truly, Jack the Ripper, in the UK here, was we didn't quite know. I mean, I wanted to do it factually. I didn't want to sort of like put William Gull and the Duke of Clarence and all that sort of thing, and the Sonic conspiracies. I wanted to take the facts of the Ripper case and put it in a musical format. And I was told by numerous people that it wouldn't work because you couldn't mix factual stuff, the entertainment value would go out the window. It seemed to me that the majority of people, and the first time we actually performed the show, a group of women came towards me, and I thought, here we go. I know what's going to happen here. I thought I was in for it. But they actually came up to complain that there wasn't enough buckets of blood thrown across the stage. They actually wanted blood and gore.
Right.
But no, I mean, I think probably one of the reasons that our show perhaps hasn't become as successful as I honestly thought it would become is because it is too factual, and when you take the film from hell, a golden opportunity to do something decent, make a decent film out of Ripperology. Sure enough, to actually sell the film, you've got to come back to the conspiracy theories and all that sort of side of it. It's what sells Jack the Ripper, it seems.
So in fairness to that, they had bought the comic book, and that's what they were basing the movie on, so they couldn't really move away from that too much, I suppose. Maybe they shouldn't have bought the comic book to start off with and just decided to do a Jack the Ripper movie.
But a movie's not going to be made unless it's going to sell, and the only way it is going to sell is usually through the conspiracy theory.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but that's one of the problems with doing anything on Jack the Ripper, surely, is that it's open-ended. There is no conclusion. You have to invent one in order to give the audience a closure at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I agree.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, in the East End itself, these days, there seems to be a turn. I see an effort being made to make it more. I mean, we have the Docklands exhibit. There was a artists exhibit that had paintings based on the victims' photographs not too long ago. So there does seem to be, some kind of effort being made to present to the public the factual case of Jack the Ripper. Don't you guys agree?
I agree, John, to the effect of, if I can comment on it, to the effect of that in studying the timeline of the case, I think what we're seeing right now is an era is reactive, and in context with the question that I asked Frogg, which I thought was answered very well, there's been that policy away from the facts of the case and getting back to it, which I agree is a proper way to do things, is what's going on now. So, the things that you say you saw, the websites, the talks, I think they're acting as a reaction towards taking steps away from the academics and focusing more on the entertainment portion of it or the social aspect of it, which everyone has the right to do, yet does tend to cloud the overall issue of it, in my opinion.
I think a distinction has to be made between the entertainment value, which is there's a very clear distinction between the entertainment value of Frogg's show, despite the fact that it's as accurate as he could make it to be, and on the other hand, a more serious, and I use that term sort of broadly speaking, a serious approach to the Ripper. What worries me, I think, is we've got this exhibition, and we saw a book published not so long ago by the University of Manchester, in which academics are sort of straying slowly into the field of Ripperology. The exhibition, I think, is great, but as I've said before, I think the book that accompanies it, there isn't even a chapter in that book about Jack the Ripper. It's almost as if the name is being used and the book itself, and that worries me just a little bit. It's I think there's a fun element that's there, which does put serious people off becoming involved in the subject, and there have been a number of instances where I think you start to approach a library or a research institution of some sort with a view to getting some information, and the moment you mention it's about Jack the Ripper, you kind of see them switch off and think, well, that's not a good or sensible use of our resources. and that's the area that worries me, is where people look at the cat fighting that goes on some of the websites, and it doesn't give a very mature view of or impression of Ripper studies.
I think that's a great point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I think that's a great point.
I think that's in any academic circle, though. I mean, I've seen two archaeologists go at it over a dinosaur theory, and they behave with as much, fervor and immaturity, if you want to call it, or whatever, as some of the people behave on the message boards. I think it comes into play, and no matter how academic and dry the subject matter is, when you have competing theories, human nature is human nature, and the subject is less important than human nature, and that kind of infighting is going to occur in any academic field.
Yes, I agree with you there.
The problem is just, we're talking about a serial killer, and so that nature, it's really not about the academic infighting or even that when you try to approach it and take it seriously. The bottom line is, you say serial killer, and people immediately consider it to be gruesome blood and gore with no real intellectual or academic content of worth.
Oh, believe me, I've encountered that with this podcast. People who I know who find out that I do this podcast have this, kind of disparaging opinion of it. I think I'm a freak. So,
because the subject itself does not have respectability, and in many ways, even the exhibition, although it's a very serious exhibition for Ripper studies as overall, because it's the first time there has ever been a serious exhibition put on that uses Jack the Ripper. The book itself perhaps doesn't reflect the idea that the subject of the Ripper himself is a respectable subject for study, and that's where I get mildly irritated with the message boards and things, is because although I understand if you have two archaeologists going at each other, they are at least two academic archaeologists. The subject has a certain respectability about it, so although they may be behaving in a very childish and silly way, the subject and their academic status still retains some sort of respectability, but we don't have that. So in order to give ourselves a degree of respectability and perhaps get people to take us more seriously and to give a lot more assistance in terms of research and so forth, perhaps we should strive to not be the two archaeologists rowing about dinosaur bones, and give the subject an element of respectability which we haven't got yet.
Well, Frogg, when you when you resurrected the Cloak and Dagger Club, for lack of a better term, into the Whitechapel Society 1888, did you find that just the name change and kind of refashioning it as more of an East End studies instead of a strictly Jack the Ripper studies opened it up to all of the academics that you had, such as that you guys struggled getting involved in the club when it was the Cloak and Dagger Club?
So if I can just explain a little of what happened, it was a pretty difficult thing to do in the first place, because for a start, a lot of members didn't actually want to get rid of the name Cloak and Dagger Club. People hate change. I actually had to stand up in front of a whole meeting and explain myself of how I thought we should change, the reasons why we should change. The philosophy behind the whole thing really is that, the actual hook for me was Jack the Ripper. But the more I delved into the subject, the more I fell in love with the East End, as it is now as well. Which is why that I decided to organise a photographic competition, because a lot of the buildings around the East End are being demolished. There are petitions going up. People don't want these buildings to be demolished, and I thought that the Whitechapel Society should come on board and try and do something about it. Here's an opportunity. And I was amazed when English Heritage came on board and offered to judge the competition. That was, fantastic news. It's something that, for me, in the Whitechapel Society, I want to sort of like, I want to sort of like diversify. Yeah, I mean, the Ripper murders obviously always are going to be interesting. There's always going to be open debate about them, and as I said earlier, new suspects and all the rest of it. But I'm actually going away from the murders themselves, and I'm going towards the social history of the East End. I find that far more fascinating. It's the impact the murders had on the East End, what was happening at the time, and how they influenced each other. Not so much who was Jack the Ripper, but why was Jack the Ripper is how I want the Whitechapel Society to go. Right down to a lot of these buildings that are being demolished in the East End as we speak, Victorian buildings that were around at the time of Jack the Ripper. There are petitions going, and I actively encourage the Whitechapel Society to get involved in that, to join in with these things. But, having said that, it's down to the people to, you can organise photographic competitions, you can do this, that and the other, but unless the membership wants to get involved, then it's not going to happen. So you can only do your best to try and actively encourage people to do it.
So does that mean that you would like to see a more active role politically and socially for the Whitechapel Society in the East End?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I think it's the only way of showing people that you actually mean business. I mean, otherwise just become another East London Historical Society.
And I think that's sort of the point that I was thinking of earlier, is that, you had to change the name to get recognition. And if you approach a librarian and say, I need some help about the Jack the Ripper case, the librarian doesn't read the message boards. The librarian doesn't know the key players in Jack the Ripper. So she's not basing her initial reaction on how we as a community behave or don't behave. We could all be exalted saints. I think the problem is always going to be it's the name. And Jack the Ripper has very little respectability because it is so given to Hollywood dramatization and Hollywood treatments that, like you said, you had to change it from the Cloak and Dagger to the Whitechapel Society to give it that sort of respectability. And the problem is always going to be just mentioning Jack the Ripper, you lose face.
Well, that's true. That's true, Ali, because when I talk to the general public and I use the term Whitechapel murders or Whitechapel murderer, they do not know what I'm talking about. I have to say Jack the Ripper for the common man in the street to understand, especially like when I'm giving talks and things like that. But anyway, Stan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, and this is probably a question that could be both for Ali and Frogg. Well, don't you feel that some of that lack of respect for when you go in and say, I need a book on Jack the Ripper, derives from branching out into other topics? Meaning, like Frogg said, he was interested in Jack the Ripper and then became interested in the social history, which is fine and respectable, but I think we all know that on message boards and a lot of and on a lot of people's blogs, Jack the Ripper is perhaps the tagline, and then there's so much else that kind of, I feel, takes away the credibility of attacking the case, so much so that even to mention that you want to solve the case prompts some snickers. Do you have any comments on that?
Frogg, you want to go first?
Jack the Ripper is always going to be the hook. There's nothing on the front cover of the Whitechapel Society in-house magazine that mentions Jack the Ripper at all. That was done on purpose. It was to get away. The idea was I thought, for the actual magazine to be accepted, was to try and make it, and not just the actual magazine, but also the speakers, the society. My idea was to make it 50-50 Jack the Ripper and East End history. To be really accepted in the world of Ripperology. I was going to ask a question to Paul Begg about how did he feel about the name of the Ripperologist? Did he feel that put a lot of people off? Is that one of the reasons why you stopped it being a hard copy? Because I remember you said that you wanted it to be for sale in shops and that sort of thing. Do you think that the actual name Ripperologist is enough to put some people actually stock it in their shops?
I don't know. The reason why it went electronic was very simple, and that was that there was a declining number of subscribers to start off with, which was one small problem. But there was a moment, so it's kind of complicated, so I'll get through it very quickly, is that there was 1 month where the bulk of the subscribers or resubscribers had to come in, and we realized that if for some reason they didn't, then we would not have enough money in the bank to print that issue and be able to repay to the existing subscribers what was outstanding on their subscription. So it was Eduardo who came up with the idea of going electronic, which I think is kind of a good idea, although it's a bit messy, I think, at the moment. As far as the name of the magazine is concerned, the number of times that I ring up for a review copy of a book, and if it's a Jack the Ripper book, obviously there's or has some connection with the Ripper, there's little problem. But if you're trying to get a book about the East End or something, and you say Ripperologist, I try really to play that down a bit and just say, oh, it's for Ripperologist, and then give my address, the book I wanted to be sent to, because quite often the book never they give you all the usual, oh yeah, sure, and all the rest of it, and then the book never turns up. So yeah, I mean the name is a problem in that respect, but I don't know that there's anything that we could reasonably do about that.
It seems to me that the people. I mean, I don't go on to the casebook that much. I occasionally go on to it, but it seems like a lot of people are hardened Jack the Ripper enthusiasts, not so much East End history. I could be wrong on that, but it seems to me that the majority seem to be debating the subject just of Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but
I think that's one of the problems. Just to go back to Stan, is that in order to be able to set the Jack the Ripper murders into any kind of context and come close to perhaps resolving the mystery, you have to be able to understand the context in which the murders took place, and that means that you have to understand East End history and what was going on at that time.
Yeah,
so I think the two together, and on the casebook,
I think the East End context gets mixed in with the threads, and although there are some specific East End threads that have been created that were also lost when the crash occurred, but normally it's not so much East End history, one thread, Jack the Ripper the other, but in every single Jack the Ripper suspect thread, location thread, witness thread, those elements of the history get pulled in. Well, a witness wouldn't have done this because at that time in the day, that kind of thing, and it gets gelled into one cohesive concept rather than here's the East End, here's Jack the Ripper as a separate entities.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, we know all about the clocks on every single wall in the whole neighborhood because of some of these suspect threads. So. Back to Ripperologists as it came out with the Cloak and Dagger Club. What some of those magazines were pretty much just Xerox sheets. Is that correct? It started off as pretty much a stapled together, kind of like an underground zine, right?
That's right. Yes, just 2 sheets. I think it wasn't it. Frogg was the very first
it
one.
Was. The original, yeah.
Which I think I've still got here somewhere. Yes, and then Paul Daniel took that over and basically turned it into a very good, chatty club magazine. And then there's it basically got to a point where I think it's fair to say that the bulk of the membership were people in America and or outside of London who, for one reason or another, obviously didn't attend the meetings and generally didn't know half the members that the magazine was talking about. And so it became evident that Ripperologist had become more or less a subscription magazine, less than a club magazine. And so we tried to divide it really into 2 parts, so that you had a hardcore sort of magazine and then some pages devoted to the club. But the club bit, for one reason or another, just didn't gel and didn't work, and we couldn't. They were having trouble getting speakers and everything that Frogg has been talking about, and so we couldn't promote it at all, and then that fell by the wayside, and then gradually the C&D was beginning to have such serious troubles that we kind of really had to separate from the Cloak and Dagger Club in order for the Rip to survive. Otherwise, if the Cloak and Dagger Club had gone down, the Rip would have gone down with it. And that as Frogg has said, it caused a little bit of animosity that's never been forgiven for. But basically it had to be done. We'd got a good magazine going, and Adam was producing some fantastic layouts and covers and so forth, and it was doing really well.
Just real quickly, Stan Russo has to be leaving us at the moment, so say goodbye, Stan.
Take care, guys. Great talking with everyone as usual, and hope to talk to you guys soon. Have a good day.
Nice having you on, Stan. Maybe
Thanks,
we'll
Stan.
see you next week.
You bet.
Stan.
Bye.
Just changing subjects slightly, I actually wanted to ask Frogg about another thing that is probably even more well-known and more popular than Jack the Ripper that he's also done a musical on, and that was the Titanic. You did a play called The Daughter of Destiny, I believe it was called?
Yeah, that's
Could you tell us a
right.
bit about that?
Yeah, basically, I live in a little town called Salisbury in Wiltshire. It's probably best known for being near Stonehenge, quite close to Stonehenge. But it's quite close to Southampton, and I really wanted to see if there were any victims on board the Titanic from my hometown. So I started going through the archives and came across this one person that really captured my imagination, because the blockbuster film had just come out, and the story from Salisbury kind of highlighted it. It was a young girl of 19 on the Titanic on her honeymoon. She actually worked in Salisbury for Lipton's branch of grocers, and her husband was Sir Thomas Lipton's blue-eyed boy. He was responsible. If there was a Lipton's in trouble, he'd put this manager in charge, get them back on their feet, and then move them to another store. Well, the Salisbury store was in trouble, and he came to Salisbury, fell in love with his cashier, and they got married, and Sir Thomas Lipton then offered him promotion to his store in New York, Manhattan, and on the way struck the iceberg and they both perished. But I've researched the life stories of both people, and it threw up some other fascinating stuff, because the young girl that drowned, her name was Eileen O'Leary, her brother Galbraith, he eventually emigrated to Canada and got a job on the Toronto Star and became very good friends with Ernest Hemingway. So the story is not just Titanic, and we're actually working on a booklet to be released on the story, because it's such a fascinating story involving the whole family. I turned it into, I decided it was originally just going to be like a trail around Salisbury of all the places that the Titanic victim went to in Salisbury, a school, where she worked, that sort of thing. Then I decided to turn it into a multimedia type production. So we used, it was a musical, but it involved a choir, me on the keyboards, and cinema, actors, actresses, and it was a huge, great production in the end. And we performed it a couple of times in Salisbury. Then we performed it by candlelight in a church. There was some talk of trying to do the Titanic Society, a bit like the Jack the Ripper conferences. They've got a Titanic Society conference. There was some talk of performing it there, actually, in Southampton, but I'm still waiting to hear back from them. I actually preferred doing that production. I did the Jack the Ripper one. It was more emotional, I felt.
And they were third-class passengers on the Titanic?
Yeah, they were the better third class, just above steerage. Sir Thomas Lipton actually paid their passage. That's probably why they were third class.
Okay.
So, and there was the other disc that you did, Frogg, with I can't remember what it was called now.
Angels of Sorrow.
That's the one.
Yeah. Angels of Sorrow. The idea. Sorry.
Just to set that for people, that's where you wrote music, and people like Stuart and Martin Fido, and were you involved in that too as well, Paul? Like writing about the 5 victims.
Yes,
a
I
short
think
biography on the 5 victims. Yeah,
I think I did Mary Kelly, didn't I? I can't remember.
Right, and Frogg did a musical piece between the narrations. But go ahead, Frogg.
That's right. It was chose really five authors, and each to write a piece on a chosen victim, which I then the actual story was read by an actress behind some background music, and then I did a musical interpretation that followed each read piece. The idea behind it was a charity thing for victim support in the East End of today. So all the proceeds from the sale of the CD went to today's victims of the East End. It's just a way of, because we talk about Jack the Ripper the whole time, and sometimes we neglect the victims, and I just wanted to do something for the victims in a way that helps today's victims of violence in the East End. We presented them with the first cheque, and it was all over the East End papers. They thought it was a great idea. As a matter of fact, I went to the victim support offices when I presented the cheque, and they told me the sad news that a lot of today's victims still go to the haunts that Jack took his victims to. The prostitution that was happening in 1888. Some of the locations are still there, and today's victims of violence are being abused in those very locations. So things haven't changed that much, apart from they're not being slaughtered, of course, but they're still being beaten and abused pretty badly.
Yeah, and when I was in the East End, I noticed the prostitutes on Brick Lane, just like they would have been there in 1888.
Yeah, there is a railway bridge. I think it's somewhere around the back streets of Flower and Dean Street. There's a lot of areas around there that are still quite run down. Although they put a program together now where they're doing all the buildings up. There are still 1 or 2 areas around the railway bridges, or there were anyway. The last time I was up there, and the prostitutes are still using those for open sex, under the railway bridges there.
It's not quite as bad as it was back in the late 1980s when they were visibly, parading around outside the 10 Bells and so forth. Although after one meeting of the Cloak and Dagger Club at the Princess Alice, I was waiting on the corner and I got accosted 5 times. 2 by female prostitutes, and 3 times by men in cars. I could have made a fortune.
You sexy thing, Paul.
Sorry?
You sexy thing.
Well, no. If you saw the prostitutes who are hanging around outside the 10 Bells, you wouldn't. I don't think physical attraction enters into the proceedings at all. In fact, my admiration for the lorry drivers has gone up because they obviously have no taste or discretion at all.
You probably appeared like Hutchinson's Astrakhan man.
Yes, times have changed.
Now, the Whitechapel Society meetings have changed venues quite a number of times over the years. Is that due to just needing larger size halls to hold the meetings, or do you get various reactions from different the locations that just want to kick you out, or how is that working?
I would like to say yes to your first, so that the meetings have got more members coming to them, but the real reason is that as the East End becomes more vibrant, and because it really does attract a youthful element now, the East End, the rooms in pubs, upstairs in pubs and back rooms in pubs, have been taken over by parties and discos. Even the 10 Bells now has got like a resident DJ. So more money can be made by hiring the room out than letting an organisation have it for nothing. So that's the way it's gone. But we're now meeting in the Aldgate Exchange pub, which is very, very close to the Underground Station, Aldgate East Underground Station. It's a better room than the City Darts. The layout's better and it's bigger. So, it hasn't got the history of the Princess Alice City Darts, but it's a good venue. For acoustically, it's much better. And if anybody wants to give a presentation, with a laptop, it's better for that as well.
Now, you've had, everyone really speak there over the years. Who are some of your favorites, and why?
Oh, Paul Begg.
I'll pay you later.
But he won't come back, you see. He won't come back and do it again. I've been trying to banter him to come back, but virtually every Jack the Ripper author. As a matter of fact, one of the only ones that hasn't spoken there is Bruce Paley, but I've actually been in contact with him recently. I've managed to trace his email address, and I've been in contact with him to try and give a talk. That would be a great one to have, next year if possible. But I liked Barrett when he came, talking about the diary stuff. Oh, that was absolutely fantastic, because it was a little bit controversial. He was he'd obviously had a few before he arrived, and
had a few when he was there.
Poor old Keith Skinner was trying to conduct this interview, and trying to get the best out of him, and he was it was pretty difficult job. But he did a good job, and it was just fascinating hearing what Barrett had to say about the diary and stuff. That was because the diary always does, doesn't it? It gets people going and that, and to have him there, the guy that supposedly got the thing in the first place, was fantastic.
What often forgotten, of course, is that you also had Anne Graham there when Paul Feldman did his talk. So you had at that time Anne Graham, Feldy, Shirley Harrison.
I didn't go to that one, I don't think.
Oh, didn't you? I think that was one of the first, actually. In fact, it may well have been the first.
I think I missed all the meetings at the Almo, the first meetings at the Almo. I came on board at the when Paul Daniels had taken over, and it was at the City Darts.
Right. It's,
but of course, in those days, because there wasn't Ripper Notes or the casebook or anything like that, the meetings in London were every single major author talked there, and that's why I think the Ripperologist became so successful. There was no trouble getting speakers because there hadn't been anything like it. It was the first, Mark Galloway started it all off, so he had all the authors to choose from.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the figures, the people like Nick Warren and Mark Galloway and Stephen Ryder are the three really that have made Ripper studies or significant changes and advances to the field. And I mean, they're kind of or should be sort of iconic figures up there, really, because they had the guts to start off the first Ripper magazine, the first Ripper Club, which led to all the conferences and so forth, and in a roundabout way, and also the first Ripper site on the internet.
Yeah.
And they've been paying for it ever since.
Indeed they have. Yes, it's.
How often do you book your speakers at the Whitechapel Society? I mean, how far in advance?
Well, I'm booking now for next year, so and it's amazing the reaction you get. You actually have to say, look, I know this is a long way in advance, but it's the only way to do it. I mean, I like to be sure in my mind that basically, if anything happened to me and I for some reason couldn't do it anymore, that I'm going to leave the thing in a healthy state. So I like to book them as far in advance as I possibly can. I mean, we had Jeremy Beadle gave, I think perhaps one of his last ever public performances was at our Christmas party, and that was booked a year and a few months in advance. I mean, obviously he was very busy anyway, but well, I'm actually booking now for next year.
Wow.
Sad loss, Jeremy.
Yeah, he gave it was probably the best Christmas party we had ever had, and it was obvious that the guy wasn't very well. You could see it in his face. He was, he wasn't very well at all, and he did it's just an unbelievable night. Fantastic. He really will be sadly missed. He was a great person.
I don't think anything that Jeremy used to go to in the field is ever going to be the same again. It won't. The conferences and everything. It's just going to, with him not being there. It's just Miss the guy a lot.
He's a difficult one to replace at the conference, and the conference organisers have all said that. How are we going to replace him?
Well, you can't, can you? I mean, Jeremy.
Can you imagine who has to step into his shoes at the next one? I mean, that's going to be... No one's going to volunteer for that job.
No.
I suppose the only thing that the only good side about it is that you won't have blokes having to take their trousers off at the or drop their trousers at the quiz, which Jeremy always used to manage to get people to do.
Yeah, he managed to get people to do all sorts of things that we would never do in a million years. I mean, yeah. We had a conga go around at the Aldgate Exchange. There was a conga going, and people that never get up and dance or anything like that. All these old guys were up there doing a conga. It was just unbelievable.
My abiding memories is of Perry Curtis, who's a seriously heavyweight academic. I mean, not in physically, but I mean, there's a heavyweight academic standing on a chair in front of everybody with his trousers around his ankles. It's a bizarre what Jeremy could get people to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we've reached. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, I have a final question that needs to be asked.
Sure.
Before we get off. Why the name Frogg? I have to know.
I knew you were going to ask that question, Robert.
Have you seen what he looks like, Robert?
Cheers,
I have. I definitely have.
Well,
I usually answer that.
Somebody had
I
to
usually
say
answer that question by saying that I was born during a leap year. I don't know. The honest answer is it was a nickname given to me by my father, who had probably a worse sense of humour than myself, and he started calling me Frogg for some reason. To this day, I don't know why. And it caught on to such a degree that all my teachers called me up at school, and I've been called it ever since.
That's Frogg with 2 G's, though. So.
It's got to be 2 G's, yeah. Just make it a little bit different.
Well,
your neighbours, do they?
Any more final questions for Frogg Moody while we have him on today?
I also thought that seeing Paul Begg has got 2 G's, I'd have the same, so,
Right. He should probably trademark that.
Yeah.
Not sure what to say. There should have been a response came immediately to my lips, but I don't know what to say. Just flattered.
Well, Frogg Moody, we thank you for being on the show today, and it's been very interesting. And
Well, thanks for inviting us on. It's a great idea.
well, thank you.